It all began in a quiet residential complex where life seemed simple and uneventful. People went about their daily routines, saying hello to neighbors on the way to work, jogging around the park, or enjoying the calm evenings by their patios. Among the amenities, the pool was a shared treasure that brought everyone together. On sunny days, children splashed in the water, parents lounged with books, and some residents practiced swimming laps. Access to this pool was simple, but there was a rule: a single key-controlled entry. And it was supposed to stay safe with the residents. At first, everything was normal. The key sat in a lockbox for each apartment, and everyone followed the rules. But one morning, a resident noticed the key missing from the lockbox. At first, it seemed like a small mistake. Maybe someone had forgotten to put it back. But when it happened again a few days later, suspicion started to build. Residents began murmuring among themselves, questioning who could be responsible. Nothing huge was lost yet, but the disappearance of the key was unsettling because it broke the trust the community had built over the years. Among the residents, there was someone who saw an opportunity. This person had observed the routine of others in the building closely. They noticed which apartments left doors unlocked at night, who went to the pool most often, and when the staff checked the lockboxes. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but this person was paying attention. The idea was simple in their mind. If they could get the key, even for a short time, they could make a copy. Once they had that copy, they could come and go as they pleased without being traced. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. After all, it was just a pool key, and nobody would know. Unbeknownst to the thief, there was a new tenant in the building who was not who they appeared to be. On the surface, this tenant blended in perfectly, keeping to themselves, nodding politely to neighbors, and quietly attending to personal routines. But beneath the calm exterior, this person was trained to observe, record, and analyze behavior. They noticed small patterns, the kind that most people would overlook. They watched who accessed the pool at what times, who had guests over, and who seemed nervous around the lockboxes. They didn't draw attention to themselves and didn't say much, but every little detail was noted. As the days passed, the thief became more confident. The key had been taken several times now, and no one had suspected them. They even started lending the duplicate key to friends who wanted to use the pool at odd hours. This made the situation more complicated, because now it wasn't just one person involved. The pool became a place of activity that wasn't always welcome. The quiet, orderly community began to notice odd sounds at night. The faint splash of water when the pool was supposed to be empty, and lights that flickered on and off. The residents who cared about the rules were uneasy, but they didn't know who was responsible. Meanwhile, the undercover tenant continued their observations without revealing their purpose. They noticed that the thief had habits that made them easy to track if you were paying attention. For example, they tended to go to the pool at unusual hours, always carrying a small bag with them. Sometimes they lingered near the lockbox longer than necessary. The undercover tenant began documenting these actions, keeping a mental record of dates, times, and unusual behaviors. Each small clue was like a piece of a puzzle. They were slowly putting the picture together. The atmosphere in the building began to shift. People who were once carefree about the pool started locking doors and keeping a closer eye on their surroundings. There were discussions during morning coffee and casual chats by the mailboxes about the missing key. Some residents suggested installing cameras or hiring extra security. The thief, oblivious to the growing tension, felt untouchable. They didn't consider that someone was watching them closely and quietly gathering evidence. One afternoon, the thief made a bold move. They took the key during peak hours when the pool was crowded, hoping to avoid suspicion in plain sight. They walked past children playing and adults sunbathing, confident no one would notice. But the undercover tenant had been ready. From a discreet distance, they recorded the thief's movements, noting the exact time and how they accessed the lockbox. It was subtle, unnoticed by anyone around, but it was a critical piece of evidence. As evening approached, whispers spread through the community. People talked about the strange noises, the key going missing, and the growing sense of unease. There were small confrontations as well, neighbors asking others if they had seen anything unusual. Mild arguments over trust and responsibility. and a sense that something bigger was happening than just a missing key. Some residents felt frustrated that rules weren't being respected, while others worried about safety and accountability. The thief, meanwhile, felt a thrill. They believed they were clever, thinking they could manipulate the system without consequences. They didn't realize that the quiet tenant who seemed indifferent was in fact observing every move, preparing for a moment when intervention would be necessary. The more the thief acted carelessly, the more the evidence stacked up. Every borrowed key, every late-night visit to the pool, every small act of audacity was being silently documented. As days turned into a week, the tension in the building increased. Residents were wary, glancing at each other with suspicion. There were quiet conversations about what to do, suggestions to change locks, and debates over fairness and security. The pool, once a place of leisure and community bonding, had become a symbol of mistrust and unease. People were beginning to understand that a small, seemingly insignificant action like taking a key could have far-reaching consequences. The undercover tenant continued their careful work, never revealing their purpose and never acting hastily. They noticed patterns in the thief's behavior, including the times they were most likely to strike, friends they confided in, and the methods they used to avoid suspicion. Each detail was recorded in their mind and occasionally in discreet notes. They began planning how to catch the thief without causing unnecessary alarm or putting anyone in danger. The goal was not to humiliate, but to resolve the situation efficiently and ensure the community remained safe. Meanwhile, the thief grew bolder, feeling invincible and unaware of the eyes watching them. They started to take bigger risks, trying to impress friends and showing off their daring by accessing the pool during unusual hours. This reckless behavior, while exciting for them, only made it easier for the undercover tenant to track and anticipate their next move. Each act of carelessness added to the growing record of evidence. Residents continued to talk in hushed tones about the missing key and the strange events at the pool. Some tried to ignore it, hoping it would blow over, while others were determined to find the responsible party. There was a mix of fear, curiosity, and frustration. Everyone had an opinion, but no one could pinpoint the thief. The tension was growing quietly, like a storm approaching, ready to break. By the end of the first week, it became clear that the small theft was more than just a minor annoyance. The repeated disappearances of the key had stirred the entire community, forcing people to pay closer attention to each other and to the rules that governed their shared space. The undercover tenant, calm and observant, was ready to act when the time came. Knowing that patience and careful planning were essential, the stage was set for a confrontation that no one expected. The thief, confident and unaware, continued to believe in their cleverness. The community, anxious and watchful, waited for clarity. And the undercover tenant, quiet but vigilant, prepared for the moment when a simple key would reveal more than anyone imagined, setting in motion events that would surprise everyone and forever change the way the residents thought about trust, security, and observation. After the first week of tension, the quiet residential complex began to feel different. The pool, once a place of relaxation and laughter, now carried a sense of caution. Residents who had previously ignored the rules started keeping a closer eye on their surroundings. People walked past the lockboxes more slowly, checking the keys and sharing nervous glances with one another. No one knew who the thief was, but the repeated disappearances of the pool key had everyone on edge. The thief, confident in their scheme, continued to operate in the shadows. They had noticed that no one suspected them, and this false sense of security made them careless. They began borrowing the key more often, even leaving copies with friends who were unaware of the potential consequences. Sometimes the thief would sneak to the pool during late hours, believing no one could see them. They felt smart and untouchable, but in reality, every move was being observed. The undercover tenant, blending perfectly with the rest of the community, had a calm and deliberate way of tracking the situation. They noticed patterns that others didn't. For instance, the thief always seemed to check the hallway before heading to the pool and occasionally glanced around as if worried about being followed. The undercover tenant made careful mental notes, documenting each irregularity without raising suspicion. They understood that catching someone required patience and strategy, not force. The building management, unaware of the exact situation, began receiving complaints. Residents reported odd noises near the pool at night. Some said they saw lights flickering through windows when the pool area should have been empty. Children had mentioned strangers swimming when they shouldn't have been, and some adults expressed concern over safety. Management decided to address the issue publicly, thinking it might scare off whoever was responsible. An announcement was made, emphasizing that pool rules would be enforced strictly from now on. The message suggested that any violation, including taking or duplicating the key, would result in fines or even removal from the complex. Some residents thought it was overkill, but the thief felt a twinge of worry. They considered slowing down, but pride and curiosity kept them going. The thrill of evading detection was intoxicating. Meanwhile, the undercover tenant continued to observe carefully. They weren't just watching the thief. They were learning how the building responded to stress, how residents communicated, and how rules were enforced. This attention to detail helped them plan the next steps. It wasn't about catching the thief for punishment. It was about understanding the full scope of the issue and ensuring the situation could be resolved safely and effectively. One evening, the thief decided to take the risk of sneaking into the pool area during a busy time. It was early evening, just as the sun was setting, and several families were around. They thought the crowd would make them invisible. Carrying the duplicate key in their pocket, they glanced around, ensuring no one was paying attention. They were so confident that they didn't notice the undercover tenant casually watching from a distance. The undercover tenant followed from a position that was inconspicuous. They recorded movements discreetly, noting the exact time the thief entered the pool area, how they accessed the water, and how they interacted with others. Every action the thief took added more evidence to the growing file. The tenant also observed the reactions of nearby residents, who appeared puzzled but didn't suspect anything criminal yet. Over the next few days, the thief grew even bolder. They began to experiment, lending the duplicate key to a small circle of friends. These friends, unaware of the risk, sometimes arrived at odd hours, making noise and leaving signs that the pool was being used inappropriately. The community's trust began to fray further. Small arguments started to appear, and tension grew among residents who had once felt safe and relaxed. Management, trying to maintain order, increased patrols near the pool. They checked the lockboxes more often and reminded residents about the rules. This only made the thief more cautious in some ways, but their ego prevented them from stopping completely. The duplicate key now represented both freedom and risk. Each use was a gamble, and the consequences were slowly catching up. Meanwhile, the undercover tenant began to develop a strategy. They realized that confronting the thief too early could backfire. Instead, they continued documenting patterns and collecting information about how the duplicate keys were distributed. They also observed other residents, ensuring that innocent people weren't mistakenly implicated. This careful approach was vital because it would allow the situation to be resolved fairly and efficiently. Residents started noticing subtle changes in the behavior of those around them. Some people became more protective of their keys, while others began questioning the honesty of their neighbors. Conversations were filled with speculation, and minor conflicts emerged over trust and responsibility. The thief, oblivious to the growing scrutiny, continued to act with reckless confidence. One day, the thief attempted another late-night visit to the pool. This time, they were caught in a small but telling moment. A resident who had been suspicious spotted them leaving the area and asked a casual question about their presence. The thief managed to respond without raising immediate alarm, but the interaction left a subtle mark. Someone had noticed, even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. The undercover tenant, having noted this incident, realized the thief's confidence could become their weakness. Each risk the thief took added more clarity to the situation. The patterns became easier to predict. Certain hours, certain friends, certain behaviors. The tenant now had a mental map of the thief's habits. They knew that the next move would be crucial. As the days passed, the pool area became a quiet stage for a larger story. Residents continued their routines, but the sense of vigilance was growing. Families still swam, children still played, but there was an underlying awareness that something was off. People were no longer carefree. Trust was strained, and small gestures of caution were everywhere. The thief didn't notice the change in the atmosphere, focused on the thrill of their actions. The undercover tenant began preparing for a subtle intervention. They understood that direct confrontation could escalate the situation unnecessarily. Instead, their plan involved timing, observation, and ensuring that evidence was undeniable. They wanted the resolution to be clear to everyone, not just a personal victory. The goal was to restore trust to the community and prevent further misuse of the pool key. In the meantime, the thief's actions continued to ripple through the complex. Friends who had received duplicate keys began using them at different times, creating additional traces of unauthorized activity. The pool area, once predictable and calm, became irregular and unpredictable. Small signs of intrusion were noticed: misplaced towels, footprints on the deck, and water disturbed at unusual hours. These details, though minor to most residents, were critical pieces of evidence to the undercover tenant. The tension in the building reached a subtle but powerful peak. Residents were more alert, conversations carried an undercurrent of suspicion, and the atmosphere around the pool shifted. The thief remained unaware that the quiet tenant, observing from a distance, had gathered enough information to predict most of their moves. Every late-night splash, every borrowed key, every glance around the hallway added to the growing awareness that someone was carefully watching as part of their strategy. The undercover tenant also began documenting the social dynamics around the pool. They noticed which residents were most vigilant, who was likely to notice irregular behavior, and who was more trusting. This allowed the tenant to anticipate who could be influenced or informed during the eventual resolution. They were creating a web of understanding that would ensure a smooth conclusion without unnecessary conflict. The thief, still full of bravado, planned another visit to the pool. This time it was during a time when most residents would be home, but not near the pool area. They carried the duplicate key confidently, not realizing that the undercover tenant had been preparing a controlled observation of this very event. Every detail from entry to exit was recorded mentally, adding to a pattern that was almost complete. Meanwhile, whispers among residents continued to spread. People noticed the subtle shifts in behavior, from suspicious glances to small security measures. Some joked nervously about the missing key, while others expressed genuine concern over safety and fairness. The community was slowly realizing that even small actions could disrupt the balance of trust and safety they had relied upon for years. The undercover tenant remained calm, patient, and methodical. They were aware that the next few moves by the thief could determine how the situation unfolded. With careful timing and careful observation, they were ready to move when the opportunity presented itself. Their presence was invisible, but their influence on the events was quietly growing. By the end of Part 2, the stage was set for a critical turning point. The thief had grown bold, unaware of the watchful eyes tracking every step. The community was tense but resilient, learning to adapt and notice irregularities. And the undercover tenant, quietly gathering evidence and analyzing behavior, prepared for the moment when subtle observation would transform into decisive action. Shaping the outcome for everyone involved, the situation in the residential complex had been building for weeks. What had started as a simple missing key was now a source of tension and suspicion. Residents were more careful than before, checking the lock boxes, keeping track of who went to the pool, and questioning behavior they might have ignored in the past. The community was on edge, even if most people did not understand why. The thief, still confident, continued to exploit the pool key. They had borrowed it several times, shared duplicates with friends, and grown careless in the process. Each action seemed harmless to them, but the consequences were beginning to ripple through the community. Unseen by the thief, the undercover tenant had been observing every move, documenting patterns, and slowly building a complete picture of the situation. This tenant had been careful to remain inconspicuous. No one suspected them. They appeared quiet, respectful, and ordinary. But beneath the calm exterior, they were calculating and methodical. They noted who had the duplicate keys when the pool was accessed, and what small signs were left behind that revealed unauthorized usage. Each piece of information was a clue, and they were piecing them together carefully. The building management, sensing the growing unrest, had decided to take stronger action. Notices went up around the complex reminding residents of the rules and threatening penalties for violations. Staff were instructed to monitor the pool more closely and check the lockboxes more frequently. The thief noticed some changes in the security measures, but still believed they could navigate around them. Their confidence was high, and they underestimated the watchful eyes that had been following their every move. One afternoon, the thief and a friend used the duplicate key to sneak into the pool area. The undercover tenant observed from a distance, noting the exact time they entered and exited, and recording small behaviors that revealed their methods. The tenant also observed the reactions of other residents, who were puzzled by the sudden appearance of unfamiliar swimmers but did not suspect anything criminal. Every detail added to the growing evidence that would eventually lead to resolution. As the days went on, the undercover tenant began to formulate a strategy. They realized that direct confrontation could be risky and that timing was essential. They also understood the importance of community trust. Any intervention needed to be subtle and careful, ensuring that the resolution would restore confidence rather than create chaos. They mapped out when the thief was likely to act and how to catch them in a way that was undeniable. Meanwhile, the thief continued to operate with growing boldness. They began planning nighttime visits to the pool, thinking the darkness would hide their actions. They lent duplicate keys to friends who were less cautious, which increased the risk of exposure. The more they acted recklessly, the clearer the patterns became. Unbeknownst to them, their friends' movements also contributed to the growing web of evidence the undercover tenant was collecting. The community, meanwhile, became more vigilant. Residents who had been suspicious started sharing information quietly. Some watched the pool from their balconies, while others took note of unusual comings and goings. Conversations in the hallways shifted from casual greetings to quiet discussions about trust and responsibility. The thief remained unaware of how much attention they had drawn, believing the situation was still manageable. One evening, the thief attempted a daring move. They planned to use the key during a busy time when families were enjoying the pool. They thought the crowd would make it impossible for anyone to notice their actions. However, the undercover tenant had anticipated this move. From a discreet distance, they observed and recorded the events, noting the thief's exact actions, the friends they had with them, and the reactions of other residents. Every detail was carefully documented. The thief's confidence began to show cracks in their behavior. They occasionally glanced around nervously, unaware that the undercover tenant was calmly observing and taking note. Their friends, too, began to act awkwardly, sensing the tension in the air. These small signs were important. They revealed cracks in the carefully constructed facade of control that the thief had maintained. Each nervous glance and hurried action added to the evidence that the undercover tenant had been collecting in the background. The building management continued their efforts. They installed temporary signs, increased patrols, and reminded residents of the rules. Some residents began to take extra precautions, ensuring their own keys were secure and reporting any unusual activity. The thief, caught in their own plans, barely noticed these changes. Thinking they were still operating without consequence, the undercover tenant also began observing the social dynamics of the residents. They noticed which individuals were most likely to notice unusual behavior, who could be trusted to maintain discretion, and who might unintentionally complicate the situation. This understanding was critical for planning the next steps. By knowing how the community interacted and responded, the tenant could anticipate potential obstacles and ensure a smooth resolution. One night, the thief decided to use the key once more, this time attempting a particularly risky move. They planned to enter the pool area at a time when few people were around, believing that the minimal presence would reduce the chances of detection. The undercover tenant had predicted this and positioned themselves in a vantage point, where they could observe everything without being seen. Every movement of the thief was recorded mentally, including their method of entry and exit, interactions with friends, and small behaviors that revealed patterns. The thief's friends, unaware of the surveillance, added complexity to the situation. They entered and exited at different times, left small signs of their presence, and interacted with the thief in ways that made patterns more obvious. Each action was a thread that, when combined, formed a clear picture of how the thefts were being carried out. The undercover tenant was patient, letting these threads come together to ensure there would be undeniable evidence when the time came. As the week progressed, community's tension grew. Residents noticed subtle changes in behavior, small signs that something unusual was happening. Children spoke of unfamiliar swimmers. Adults noticed misplaced towels. And neighbors exchanged quiet words about trust and responsibility. The atmosphere around the pool became tense, a place where enjoyment was tempered by caution. The thief remained oblivious, focused on the thrill of their actions to notice the growing scrutiny. The undercover tenant, meanwhile, had everything carefully mapped out. They knew the thief's patterns, the timing of their visits, the distribution of duplicate keys, and the reactions of friends and neighbors. They were ready to take the next step, confident that their observations would allow them to intervene without unnecessary confrontation or confusion. The plan was to ensure that the resolution would be clear, fair, and effective. The thief, in their overconfidence, had not considered how thoroughly they were being watched. Each act of boldness, each borrowed key, each moment of carelessness had added to the growing body of evidence. The community, though largely unaware of the exact situation, was becoming more vigilant, noticing irregularities and reacting to small disturbances. The stage was set for a moment where all these elements would converge, revealing the truth and restoring order. By the end of Part 3, the trap was almost ready. The thief's recklessness, the careful observation of the undercover tenant, and the growing awareness of the community created a perfect storm. What had started as a small theft had escalated into a complex web of behaviors, interactions, and patterns. The next move would be decisive, revealing the depth of the situation and setting the stage for the confrontation that would resolve the tension and restore balance to the complex. The quiet residential complex had been buzzing with a subtle tension for weeks. Residents noticed small changes in the atmosphere, a growing sense of vigilance, and a careful observation of each other's actions. The pool, which had once been a place of simple joy, had become the center of concern, trust issues, and speculation. The missing key had transformed from a minor inconvenience into a symbol of unease and uncertainty. The thief had grown bolder, underestimating the attention they were drawing. Each time they used the duplicate key, lent it to a friend, or acted without caution, the threads of evidence grew stronger. They felt untouchable, confident in their cleverness and their ability to avoid consequences. What they did not realize was that every action had been recorded, observed, and analyzed by the undercover tenant. The tenant had been watching for weeks, patiently documenting patterns, habits, and behaviors. They knew the thief's routines, the friends who had access to duplicate keys, the subtle signs left behind after each unauthorized visit. They had also been noting how the community reacted, who noticed irregular behavior, and which residents could be counted on for discreet support if needed. Patience was their greatest tool. They had waited for the perfect moment to act. One evening, the thief decided to take the risk of visiting the pool at an unusual hour. They believed that the darkness and quiet would make their actions invisible. They carried the duplicate key confidently, unaware that the undercover tenant had positioned themselves carefully, observing from a distance without being seen. Every move, every glance around, every step the thief took was noted with precision. As the thief entered the pool area, a sense of excitement mixed with subtle nerves. They moved quickly, checking the surroundings, making sure no one could observe them. Their friends, who accompanied them, acted cautiously, sensing that something was different, though they did not know what. The pool area, usually lively, was empty except for a few distant residents who were unaware of what was happening. Every detail of this visit was crucial. It's a final piece in the larger plan the undercover tenant had been constructing. Unnoticed, the tenant observed the thief and their friends carefully. They noted the time of entry, how they handled the key, the behavior of each individual, and the small interactions that revealed patterns of carelessness. These observations were meticulous, aiming to capture enough detail to ensure that no one could dispute what was happening. The tenant had studied the situation long enough to know exactly how the next few moments would unfold. The thief, emboldened by their previous successes, began to act even more recklessly. They swam in areas that were under partial observation, splashed water loudly, and laughed in a way that suggested confidence. Their friends followed suit, not realizing that their behaviors were contributing to the evidence. Each movement was a mistake, a small crack in the careful illusion of control they had maintained for so long. Meanwhile, the community began to respond subtly. A few residents noticed unusual activity and decided to observe quietly from their balconies and windows. They did not intervene, but their presence added an extra layer of tension. The thief sensed nothing, believing that the night's quiet would protect them. However, the awareness of unseen observers made their mistakes more noticeable and easier to track. The undercover tenant continued to document, recording mentally the trajectory of the events. They watched how the thief entered and exited the pool, how the duplicate key was handled, and how friends interacted with each other. Patterns became clear. The thief's overconfidence, reliance on friends, and small lapses in judgment were all contributing to the collapse of their plan. The tenant also noted the reactions of the environment, the sounds, the lighting, and the positions of the residents nearby. As the evening progressed, the thief attempted a particularly bold move. They wanted to show off, moving through the pool area with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. They believed their cleverness would protect them, but the risk was increasing. Each action now carried the weight of exposure, and small mistakes began to surface. One of their friends dropped a towel in an unusual place, creating a trace of unauthorized presence. Another friend made a comment that suggested they had been using the key without understanding the consequences. These small errors, unnoticed by the thief, were critical evidence. The undercover tenant, knowing the situation was reaching its peak, prepared to step forward. They had all the information needed: patterns, behaviors, key distribution, and evidence of unauthorized use. What remained was the right moment to reveal the truth. They planned to intervene calmly, ensuring that the situation could be addressed without chaos and that the community would understand the resolution clearly. Suddenly, the thief attempted another daring move. They tried to exit the pool area in a way that seemed casual, but was actually risky. The undercover tenant had anticipated this, quietly moving closer to ensure the intervention could be smooth. The thief's overconfidence was about to meet the carefully prepared reality of observation and accountability. The community, though largely unaware of the precise details, began to sense a shift. Small whispers spread. Some residents glanced in the direction of the pool, and others quietly noted the unusual movements. The thief, engrossed in their actions, remained unaware of the growing awareness around them. The tension reached a point where exposure was imminent, and the culmination of weeks of observation was about to come into play. The intervention happened quietly but decisively. The undercover tenant approached the thief and their friends with calm authority. They revealed their identity in a manner that was controlled and professional. The thief was caught off guard, unable to maintain the illusion of cleverness. The evidence that had been collected over weeks was clear and undeniable. The situation, which had been building subtly, now reached its peak. The thief's friends were surprised and nervous. Some were unaware of the full extent of the actions they had participated in. The community, witnessing the intervention, began to understand the scale of the problem and the careful measures taken to resolve it. The tension that had been building dissipated slowly as the truth became clear. What had seemed like a simple missing key had been part of a larger pattern of behavior that required careful management and observation. The aftermath was handled with calm efficiency. The duplicate keys were collected, security measures reinforced, and residents informed about the importance of trust and accountability. The thief faced the consequences of their actions, both socially and within the management framework. Friends who had unknowingly participated learned lessons about responsibility and honesty. The undercover tenant, having resolved the situation without confrontation or chaos, quietly returned to their normal routines, leaving the community with restored order and understanding. The pool, once a symbol of tension, gradually returned to its original role as a place of enjoyment and community. Residents were more vigilant, but not fearful, understanding the importance of rules and trust. Small changes in behavior persisted, but the overall atmosphere improved. The intervention had not only stopped the immediate problem, but it also strengthened the community's awareness and cohesion by the end of this phase. It was clear that what had begun as a minor theft had revealed deeper lessons about observation, patience, and responsibility. The community had been tested, the thief had been exposed, and Undercover tenant had successfully navigated the delicate balance between authority and discretion. The pool once again became a place where laughter and relaxation could return. A reminder that vigilance and careful planning could restore harmony even after disruption. After the confrontation, the residential complex slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. The pool, once a symbol of tension and mistrust, became a place of laughter and community again. Residents cautiously began to relax, but the lessons learned over the past weeks were still fresh in their minds. Everyone understood that small actions could have big consequences, and trust, once shaken, needed careful rebuilding. The thief, now fully aware of the undercover tenant's observation and intervention, faced the consequences of their actions. They were embarrassed, humbled, and frustrated, realizing that what they had considered a harmless game had been far more serious than they imagined. Management and the community dealt with the situation fairly, ensuring that the thief understood the severity of taking the key and distributing duplicates without permission. Friends who had been unaware participants learned lessons about responsibility and accountability. The event left a lasting impression on everyone involved, making them more cautious and aware of how seemingly small actions could disrupt the harmony of the community. The undercover tenant quietly resumed their daily routine, blending seamlessly back into the community. Though their presence had been crucial in resolving the situation, they did not seek recognition or praise. They had carefully observed, documented, and finally intervened, ensuring that the outcome was clear, fair, and effective. Their patience and discretion had prevented unnecessary chaos, and the residents slowly realized the importance of calm, careful observation in maintaining safety and trust. Residents began to rebuild their sense of community. Neighbors who had been suspicious of each other started to interact more openly, though with a new awareness of boundaries and responsibility. Conversations returned to casual topics like gardening, work, and weekend plans. The pool once again became a space for children to play and families to relax. But everyone had a renewed respect for the rules and the shared responsibility that came with community living. The experience had taught the residents that vigilance and cooperation were essential to maintain harmony. The building management implemented small but effective changes to prevent a similar situation in the future. Lockboxes were checked more regularly, keys were accounted for carefully, and residents were reminded about the importance of security and honesty. These measures were communicated with care, ensuring that they were seen as protective rather than punitive. The community responded positively, appreciating the balance between safety and trust that the new measures provided over time. The story of the pool key heist became a quiet lesson rather than a source of ongoing tension. Residents would occasionally reflect on the events with a mix of humor and seriousness. It was a reminder that even minor disruptions could have larger implications if not addressed thoughtfully. Children who had witnessed the events, though unaware of all the details, understood that rules and honesty were important. Adults, too, gained a deeper appreciation for the value of observation, discretion, and patience in resolving conflicts. The thief, having faced both social and management consequences, began to change their behavior. They learned to respect the rules, understand the importance of trust, and consider the broader impact of their actions. While there was lingering embarrassment, it was coupled with a genuine understanding of responsibility. The community in turn responded with cautious acceptance, allowing the thief to reintegrate while maintaining awareness and vigilance. This balance of accountability and forgiveness helped restore harmony. Friends who had been inadvertently involved also reflected on their actions. They realized that their trust in the thief had led them to participate unknowingly in unauthorized activities. These lessons encouraged them to be more mindful in the future, paying closer attention to their own responsibilities and the potential consequences of following others without question. The incident became a collective learning experience, strengthening the community's understanding of accountability, observation, and personal responsibility.